In a small university town in Ohio, Dr. Alan Carter spent most of his nights alone in his dimly lit office at the math department. The room was cluttered with stacks of papers, empty coffee cups, and whiteboards covered in complex equations. Alan was known for his eccentric habits and his obsession with numbers. He had always been fascinated by patterns, especially those that others overlooked. His colleagues often joked that he could find meaning in randomness itself. One late evening, as rain tapped gently against the window, Alan scribbled furiously on a notepad. For months, he had been working on a new theory he called adaptive algorithmic probability. It wasn't just another mathematical model. It was an attempt to predict outcomes based on seemingly unrelated data points. Most people thought it was impossible, but Alan believed otherwise. He felt he was close to something groundbreaking. As the clock ticked past midnight, Alan leaned back in his chair and stared at the page before him. Something about the equation felt right this time. To test it, he decided to use real-world data. He pulled up weather reports from the past year and fed them into his laptop. Then he added traffic patterns, stock market trends, and even social media activity. When he ran the simulation, the results stunned him. The equation predicted rainfall in Cincinnati 3 days later with eerie accuracy. Not only that, it also hinted at a spike in car accidents during the same period. Alan couldn't believe what he was seeing. He double-checked his work, reran the calculations, and got the same result every time. Excited but cautious, he knew. He needed someone else to look at this. Someone who wouldn't dismiss it outright. That's when he thought of Laura Bennett. Laura was a physicist in the same university, specializing in chaos theory. She had a reputation for being sharp and skeptical, which made her perfect for this. The next morning, Alan knocked on Laura's office door. "Got a minute?" he asked, holding up his notebook. Laura looked up from her desk, raising an eyebrow. "What now, Alan? Another one of your wild theories?" Despite her tone, there was a hint of curiosity in her voice. Alan grinned and handed her the notebook. "Just take a look," he said. Laura flipped through the pages, her expression shifting from skepticism to intrigue. After a few minutes, she put the notebook down and crossed her arms. "This is interesting," she admitted. "But how accurate are these predictions?" Alan explained the recent test he'd run and invited her to try it herself. Intrigued, Laura agreed. The next few days, they worked together in Alan's office, running simulations on everything from sports scores to election results. Every prediction came true. At first, they were thrilled. But soon, unease crept in. This wasn't just math anymore. It was almost like they were peering into the future. And if they could do it, who else might be able to? Their fears weren't unfounded. One night, as they were wrapping up their work, Alan's computer suddenly froze. All the files related to the project disappeared without a trace. Both of them stared at the screen in disbelief. "Did you save a backup?" Laura asked, her voice tense. Alan shook his head. Before they could figure out what happened, an email popped up in Alan's inbox. The subject line read, "Stop." The message inside was brief and anonymous. "Cease all work on your current project immediately. You don't understand the consequences." Neither Alan nor Laura spoke for a moment. Finally, Laura broke the silence. "Who would send this? And how did they know what we're working on?" Alan frowned, feeling a chill run down his spine. "I don't know, but whoever it is, they're serious." Despite the warning, neither of them wanted to give up. They began taking precautions, encrypting their files and using burner phones to communicate. Still, strange things kept happening. Their lab equipment malfunctioned randomly, and they noticed unfamiliar cars parked outside their homes. Determined to get answers, Alan suggested reaching out to someone outside academia. He remembered reading an article by Samantha Myers, a journalist known for exposing corporate scandals. Sam had a knack for digging up the truth, no matter how deeply buried it was. They contacted her under the pretense of discussing a potential story. When Sam arrived at the university, she seemed skeptical but willing to listen. Alan showed her some of their predictions, including ones tailored specifically to her life. He pointed out details like where she'd gone to dinner last week and the name of her childhood pet. Sam's eyes widened in shock. "How did you know that?" she demanded. Alan explained the math behind it, watching as her skepticism turned into fascination. Sam agreed to help them investigate further. Using her contacts, she uncovered references to a secretive organization called Erebus Group. Little was known about them, except that they operated in the shadows, influencing governments and corporations alike. What stood out most was their interest in advanced predictive technologies. It seemed likely they were behind the warnings and possibly the sabotage. As the trio delved deeper, tension grew between them. Alan became increasingly obsessed with pushing the boundaries of his equations. One night, he confided in Lavra about a troubling discovery. The math didn't just predict external events. It hinted at human behavior too. If true, it meant free will might be nothing more than an illusion. Lara tried to reassure him, but doubt lingered in her mind. Meanwhile, Erebus Group tightened its grip. Anonymous threats escalated, forcing Alan, Lavra, and Sam to go into hiding. Though frightened, they refused to abandon their work. They knew they were onto something revolutionary, something that could change the world forever. But they also realized the cost of such knowledge might be higher than any of them imagined. By the end of the week, they had reached a crossroads. Should they publish their findings and risk unleashing chaos? Or should they bury the math, keeping its secrets locked away forever? As they debated late into the night, none of them noticed the figure watching them from the shadows. Whoever it was, they were getting closer, and Alan's unusual math had already set events in motion that none of them could have foreseen. Alan, Lavra, and Sam spent their days huddled in a cramped motel room on the outskirts of town. The walls were thin, and the air smelled faintly of mildew, but it was safe for now. They had no choice but to lie low while they figured out their next move. Every time Alan closed his eyes, he saw the equations swirling in his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were sitting on something far bigger than any of them had imagined. Sam was the first to break the silence. One morning, "We need to know more about Erebus Group," she said, flipping through a stack of documents she'd gathered. "If we're going to fight back, we have to understand what we're up against." Lavra nodded in agreement, though her expression remained uneasy. She trusted Sam's instincts, but the deeper they dug, the more dangerous things seemed to become. Over the next few days, Sam used her network of contacts to piece together fragments of information about Erebus. What she uncovered painted a chilling picture. Erebus Group wasn't just a shadowy organization. It was a sprawling empire with tentacles reaching into governments, corporations, and even universities. Its members included some of the most powerful people in the world, all united by a shared goal: control. And Alan's equations, it seemed, were the key to perfecting that control. According to Sam's sources, Erebus had been monitoring Alan's work for years. At first, they had kept their distance, content to observe from afar. But when Alan cracked the code behind predictive algorithms, they decided it was time to act. The warnings, the sabotage, the surveillance, it was all part of a calculated effort to either seize the math or destroy it entirely. As Sam explained this to Alan and Lavra, Alan's face grew pale. "So they've known about my work this whole time?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sam nodded grimly. "They've probably been watching you since before you even started this project." Alan felt a wave of nausea wash over him. How could he have been so blind? All those late nights alone in his office, thinking he was just another academic chasing an impossible dream. He had never suspected he was being watched. Lara tried to reassure him. "It's not your fault, Alan. You didn't know." But her words did little to ease his guilt. He couldn't help but wonder if he had brought this danger upon himself and worse, upon those around him. If anything happened to Lavra or Sam, because of his obsession, he would never forgive himself. Determined to take action, the trio decided to run a bold experiment. They needed proof that Alan's equations could predict human behavior as well as external events. If they could demonstrate this convincingly, it might give them leverage against Erebus, or at least help them understand the full scope of the math's power. After much debate, they settled on Daniel Harper as their test subject. Daniel was a local mechanic who lived a quiet, unremarkable life. He had no ties to academia, journalism, or politics, which made him an ideal candidate. Alan argued that choosing someone completely ordinary would make the results more credible. Lavra and Sam reluctantly agreed, though both harbored doubts about the ethics of such an experiment. For the next week, Alan, Lavra, and Sam tracked Daniel's every move. They followed him discreetly, noting where he went, whom he spoke to, and what he did. Meanwhile, Alan fed data about Daniel's habits into his equations. The predictions came fast and eerily accurate. On Monday, the math said Daniel would stop for coffee at a diner on Main Street. Sure enough, he did. On Wednesday, it predicted he would call his sister in the evening. By Thursday, even Lavra had to admit the results were uncanny. But the final prediction gave them pause. According to the equations, Daniel would die in a car accident on Saturday afternoon. Alan stared at the numbers, his heart pounding. "This can't be right," he muttered. Lavra placed a hand on his shoulder. "Maybe there's an error in the calculations. We should check again." But no matter how many times they ran the simulation, the outcome remained the same. A heated argument broke out among the three. Sam insisted they had a moral obligation to warn Daniel. "If we don't say something, we're complicit in his death," she said, her voice trembling with anger. Alan shook his head. What if warning him changes nothing? What if the accident still happens regardless of what we do? Lavra chimed in, her tone measured but firm. "We can't play God, Alan. Even if the math says it's inevitable, we owe it to Daniel to try." In the end, they decided not to intervene. It was a decision none of them took lightly. As Saturday approached, the tension in the motel room became unbearable. Alan barely slept, haunted by visions of Daniel's face. Lavra spent hours pacing back and forth, questioning whether they had made the right choice. Only Sam seemed resolute, though her eyes betrayed the weight of her guilt. On Saturday afternoon, they waited anxiously for news. When the local radio station reported a fatal car crash involving a man matching Daniel's description, the room fell silent. Alan sank into a chair, his head in his hands. Lavra hugged herself tightly, tears streaming down her face. Sam stood by the window, staring out at the rain-soaked streets. None of them spoke. There were no words that could capture the enormity of what had just happened. That night, Alan sat alone in the dark, staring at the equations scrawled across his notebook. For the first time, he questioned whether his work was worth it. The math had given him answers, but at what cost? Was predicting the future truly a gift or a curse? Lavra joined him after a while, handing him a cup of tea. "We can't keep doing this," she said softly. "Not like this." Alan nodded, though he wasn't sure he believed her. Deep down, he knew they couldn't walk away, not completely. The equations were too powerful, too important. But they also couldn't ignore the moral implications of what they had done. If they wanted to continue, they would need to find a way to use the math responsibly. a task that felt nearly impossible given the circumstances. As dawn broke over the horizon, Erebus Group made its next move. A team of operatives descended on the motel, armed and ready to capture the trio. Alan, Laura, and Sam managed to escape through a back window, narrowly avoiding detection. They fled into the woods, hearts racing, knowing they were running out of time. Somewhere in the chaos, Alan clutched his notebook tightly, vowing to protect the equations at all costs, even if it meant risking everything. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Erebus Group wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted. And Alan, Lavra, and Sam were determined to ensure that day never came. The woods were cold and damp. As Alan, Lavra, and Sam stumbled through the underbrush, their breaths visible in the frosty air. Behind them, the sound of voices grew louder. Erebus Group's operatives were closing in, shouting orders and snapping twigs underfoot. The trio moved as quickly as they could, their shoes sinking into mud and leaves clinging to their clothes. They had no plan beyond survival, no destination in mind, only the instinct to keep running. After what felt like hours, they reached an old dirt road. A rusted pickup truck sat abandoned nearby, its tires flat and windows cracked. Alan hesitated for a moment before climbing into the driver's seat. To everyone's surprise, the engine sputtered to life after a few tries. "This might be our only chance," he said, glancing at Lavra and Sam in the rearview mirror. Without another word, they sped off, leaving the forest and their pursuers behind. For the next 2 days, they drove aimlessly, stopping only to refuel or grab food from gas stations. None of them dared to use their phones, knowing Erebus could track them. Instead, they relied on cash and kept their heads down, blending into the stream of travelers along the highway. Exhaustion weighed heavily on all of them, but fear kept them moving forward. Every shadow seemed suspicious, every stranger potentially dangerous. It was during one of these stops that they met Ryan Mitchell. He was leaning against a vending machine outside a diner, his leather jacket worn and his face lined with age. When Alan approached him to ask about directions, Ryan's sharp eyes caught something in Alan's demeanor. "You look like you're running from something," he said, his tone casual but probing. Alan froze, unsure how to respond. Before he could speak, Sam stepped in. "We're just passing through," she said firmly. Her hand gripping Alan's arm. Ryan studied them for a moment before nodding slowly. "If you're looking for a place to lay low, I know some people who can help." His words hung in the air, and for a second no one spoke. Then Lavra broke the silence. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice steady despite her fatigue. Ryan smiled faintly. "Let's just say I've been where you are now." Against their better judgment, they decided to trust him. Ryan led them to an abandoned factory on the outskirts of Detroit. The building was decrepit, its walls covered in graffiti and its floors littered with debris. But inside, they found a hidden world bustling with activity. Dozens of people moved about, setting up computers, repairing equipment, and sharing information. This was the Fractals, a group of rogue scientists, activists, and hackers dedicated to fighting back against oppressive systems. Ryan introduced them to the others, explaining their mission: to expose corruption, protect individuals targeted by powerful organizations, and disrupt the status quo. Many members of the Fractals had personal reasons for joining. Some had lost loved ones to corporate greed, while others had fled abusive governments. All shared a fierce determination to make a difference. At first, Alan, Lavra, and Sam felt out of place among the rebels. They weren't fighters or revolutionaries. They were academics and a journalist thrust into a situation far beyond their expertise. But as they settled in, they realized how much they had to offer. Alan's equations became a focal point for the group. With Ryan's help, they began refining the math, finding ways to introduce noise into the system, a method designed to disrupt predictive algorithms and render them less accurate. Lavra threw herself into the technical side of things, working alongside engineers to adapt the equations for practical use. She spent long hours coding and testing, her focus unwavering despite the chaos around her. Sam, meanwhile, used her skills as a storyteller to document everything. She interviewed members of the Fractals, piecing together their stories and turning them into a narrative that could inspire others to join the cause. As weeks passed, the group made significant progress. Their noise disruption program showed promise, capable of throwing off even the most advanced predictive models. For the first time since discovering the math, Alan felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe they could fight back against Erebus without surrendering the equations entirely. Maybe they could tip the scales in favor of freedom. But Erebus wasn't idle. News began to trickle in about raids on other resistance groups across the country. Safe houses were raided, leaders arrested, and supplies confiscated. It was clear Erebus was stepping up its efforts to crush dissent. Tension mounted within the Fractals as members debated whether to go underground completely or launch a direct assault on Erebus headquarters. The debate came to a head one evening during a car meeting in the factory's main hall. Voices rose as arguments clashed. Some argued that attacking Erebus directly was suicidal, while others insisted it was the only way to end the threat once and for all. Alan listened silently, his mind racing. He knew they couldn't afford to wait any longer. Erebus was growing, stronger by the day, and if they didn't act soon, it would be too late. Finally, he stood up, drawing everyone's attention. "We have the tools to disrupt their systems," he said, his voice steady despite the weight of his words. "But we also have something they don't expect: unpredictability. If we strike fast and hard, we can cripple them before they know what hit them." The room fell silent as his words sank in. After a long pause, Ryan nodded. "He's right," he said. "We've got one shot at this. Let's make it count." Plans were set into motion immediately. Teams worked around the clock to prepare for the operation, gathering intelligence, securing weapons, and finalizing strategies. Alan, Lavra, and Sam played key roles, ensuring the noise disruption program was ready for deployment. Each step brought them closer to confronting Erebus, but also closer to danger. The night before the attack, Alan found himself alone in the factory's dimly lit control room. He stared at the screens displaying maps and data, his mind replaying every decision that had led him here. Was this really the right path? Could they truly win against an organization as vast and powerful as Erebus? Doubts gnawed at him, but deep down, he knew there was no turning back. Laura joined him a short while later, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked, handing him one of the cups. Alan shook his head. "I keep thinking about what happens if we fail," he admitted. Lavra sighed, sitting beside him. "Then we'll have done everything we could. That's all anyone can ask of us." Her words offered little comfort, but they reminded him why he had started this journey in the first place. By dawn, the team was ready. Armed with gadgets, courage, and a shared sense of purpose, they boarded vehicles and headed towards Silicon Valley, where Erebus Group's headquarters lay hidden beneath a sprawling data center. As they drove, Alan clutched his notebook tightly. The equations inside, representing both their greatest weapon and their heaviest burden. When they arrived, the building loomed above them, sleek and impenetrable. Guards patrolled the perimeter, and cameras scanned every inch of the property. For a moment, doubt flickered in Alan's chest. Could they really pull this off? Then Ryan's voice crackled over the radio. "Remember why we're here." He sighed. "For Daniel, for everyone Erebus has hurt, "We can do this." With that, the operation began. Teams split up, each tasked with disabling specific parts of the facility. Alan, Lavra, and Sam made their way to the central server room, where the predictive algorithms were stored. Along the way, they encountered resistance, narrowly avoiding detection and neutralizing threats with quick thinking and teamwork. Every step felt like walking a tightrope, one wrong move away from disaster. Finally, they reached the server room. Alan plugged a device containing the noise disruption program into the mainframe. Lines of code scrolled across the screen as the program activated, sending waves of interference through Erebus's systems. Alarms blared, lights flashed, and chaos erupted throughout the building. Their plan was working, but they weren't. Safe yet as they prepared to leave, armed guards stormed the room. Shots rang out, echoing off the walls. In the confusion, Lavra was grabbed and dragged away, her cries cutting through the noise. Alan and Sam fought back, managing to incapacitate several guards, but they couldn't reach her in time. Heart pounding, Alan watched helplessly as Lavra disappeared down a corridor, her fate uncertain. The remaining team regrouped outside, battered but alive. Though they had succeeded in disrupting Erbius's operations, the cost had been high. Lavra was gone, and the weight of her capture pressed heavily on Alan and Sam. As they drove away from the data center, smoke rising in the distance, Alan vowed to rescue her no matter what it took. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. The drive back to the factory was silent, the weight of what had happened pressing down on everyone. Alan sat in the passenger seat, his hands gripping the edges of his notebook so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Sam drove with a grim expression, her eyes fixed on the road ahead, but her mind replaying the chaos at Erebus headquarters. Laura's capture weighed heavily on both of them, a constant reminder of the stakes they were up against. When they arrived, Ryan and the others greeted them with a mix of relief and concern. The operation had succeeded in disrupting Erebus's systems, but losing Lavra was a blow none of them had anticipated. "We'll get her back," Ryan said firmly, though his voice carried a hint of uncertainty. Alan nodded, though he wasn't sure he believed it. He couldn't shake the image of Lara being dragged away, her shouts fading into the distance. Over the next few days, the group worked tirelessly to gather information about Erebus's movements. They intercepted communications, hacked into security feeds, and pieced together clues about where Laura might be held. It wasn't easy. Erebus operated in the shadows, its networks encrypted and its facilities hidden. But the fractals were determined, their resolve strengthened by the knowledge that Laura's life depended on them. Alan threw himself into the effort, using his equations to predict patterns in Erebus's behavior. He spent hours poring over data, searching for any anomaly that might lead them to Lavra. Each discovery brought a flicker of hope, but it was fleeting. Erebus was always one step ahead, adapting to their disruptions and tightening its grip. Sam took charge of coordinating the rescue mission. She mapped out potential locations based on the intel they had gathered and assigned roles to each member of the team. Her leadership kept everyone focused, even as fear gnawed at the edges of their determination. For Alan, watching Sam take control was both inspiring and humbling. He realized how much he relied on her strength, especially when his own felt like it was slipping away. Finally, they identified a likely location, an underground bunker near Chicago. Intelligence suggested it was being used as a holding facility for high-value prisoners. If Lavra was anywhere, this was the place. The team prepared quickly, knowing time was not on their side. Weapons were checked, gear was packed, and strategies were rehearsed until everyone knew their part by heart. The night before the mission, Alan found himself alone in the control room again. He stared at the screens displaying maps and surveillance footage, his mind racing. What if they failed? What if Erebus was ready for them? The questions swirled endlessly, leaving him restless and uneasy. Then he remembered Laura's words during their first days on the run. "We can't play God." She had been right. But now Alan wondered if playing God was exactly what they needed to do to save her. Sam joined him after a while, sliding into the chair beside him. "You should try to rest," she said softly, her voice tinged with exhaustion. Alan shook his head. "I can't," he replied. "Not until we bring her back." Sam sighed, leaning back in her chair. "We will," she said, though her tone betrayed her own doubts. They sat there in silence for a while, the hum of the computers filling the space between them. By dawn, the team was ready. Armed with gadgets, courage, and a shared sense of purpose, they set out for Chicago. The journey was tense, every mile bringing them closer to danger. As they approached the bunker, Alan could feel his heart pounding in his chest. This was it, the moment they had been working toward. The facility was heavily guarded, its entrance concealed behind layers of security. Teams split up, each tasked with creating diversions to draw attention away from the main objective, rescuing Lavra. Alan and Sam moved stealthily through the shadows, their movements precise and deliberate. They reached the entrance undetected, disabling cameras and bypassing alarms with practiced efficiency. Inside, the air was cold and damp, the walls lined with concrete and steel. The corridors were eerily quiet, save for the faint hum of machinery. In the distance, Alan and Sam followed the map Sam had prepared, navigating the labyrinthine structure with care. Every turn brought new challenges: guards patrolling narrow hallways, locked doors requiring quick thinking to open, but they pressed on, driven by the thought of finding Lara. Finally, they reached a reinforced door marked with biometric scanners. Alan pulled out a device designed to bypass such systems, his hands trembling slightly as he worked. After a tense moment, the lock clicked open and they slipped inside. The room beyond was dimly lit, dominated by a large glass cell in the center. Inside, Lara sat slumped on a chair, wires attached to her temples and arms. Her face was pale, her eyes closed. Alan rushed to the control panel outside the cell, his fingers flying over the keys as he tried to disable the locks. Sam kept watch, her weapon drawn and ready. "Hurry," she whispered urgently, glancing over her shoulder. Just as Alan managed to unlock the door, alarms blared throughout the facility. Guards appeared at the end of the corridor, shouting orders and raising their weapons. "Go!" Sam shouted, firing a shot to cover Alan as he helped Lara out of a chair. She groaned weakly, barely conscious but alive. Together, they dragged her toward the exit, dodging bullets and narrowly avoiding capture. The noise disruption program they had deployed earlier still caused chaos within Erebus's systems, giving them a slim advantage as they fought their way out. Reaching the surface was a blur of adrenaline and fear. The team regrouped at a predetermined rally point, loading into vehicles and speeding away from the bunker. Behind them, explosions rocked the facility as self-destruct protocols activated. Erebus wasn't taking any chances, ensuring no evidence remained. Back at the factory, Lavra was rushed to a makeshift medical bay. Doctors worked feverishly to stabilize her, removing the devices that had been monitoring her brain activity. Alan stayed by her side, refusing to leave until she opened her eyes. When she finally did, her gaze met his, and she managed a weak smile. "You came for me," she murmured, her voice hoarse. Alan nodded, tears streaming down his face. Of course we did." In the days that followed, the group began to recover from the ordeal. The noise disruption program had dealt a significant blow to Erebus, crippling their predictive algorithms and forcing them to retreat temporarily. But everyone knew it was only a matter of time before they regrouped. Erebus was too powerful, too entrenched in the world systems, to be defeated so easily. As they discussed the next steps, Alan made a decision. The equations had caused enough destruction already. Keeping them secret was no longer an option. He proposed releasing fragments of the math to the public, ensuring no single entity could monopolize its power. The idea sparked debate among the fractals, some arguing it was too dangerous, while others saw it as their best chance at leveling the playing field. Ultimately, they agreed. Alan worked with Lara and Sam to prepare the release, encrypting the data and embedding safeguards to prevent misuse. When the equations went live, they spread like wildfire, sparking discussions and debates across the globe. Some hailed it as a breakthrough, while others condemned it as a threat to privacy and free will. But one thing was certain: the world would never be the same. For Alan, Lavra, and Sam, the fight was far from over. Erebus still lurked in the shadows, waiting for its next move. But for now, they had struck a blow against tyranny, proving that, even in the face of overwhelming odds, resistance was possible. As they stood together in the factory's main hall, watching news reports flood in about the equations, Alan felt a rare moment of peace. Whatever happened next, they had done what they could, and sometimes that was enough. The release of the equations sent shockwaves across the globe. Within hours, news outlets were buzzing with reports about Alan's discovery. Some called it a miracle, a tool that could revolutionize industries and save lives. Others labeled it dangerous, warning of the chaos it might unleash if misused. Debates raged in universities, governments, and living rooms as people grappled with the implications of such knowledge. For Alan, Lavra, and Sam, watching the world react was both exhilarating and terrifying. The fractals worked tirelessly, too. Managed the fallout. They monitored online forums and social media, answering questions and addressing misinformation whenever they could. Alan spent most of his time explaining the safeguards embedded in the equations, emphasizing that their purpose was to empower, not control. Lavra assisted him, her voice calm and reassuring as she spoke to journalists and researchers eager to understand the math. Sam, meanwhile, focused on documenting the story behind the equations, writing articles and giving interviews that highlighted the dangers of organizations like Erebus Group. Despite their efforts, the backlash was inevitable. Corporations accused them of destabilizing markets, while conspiracy theorists claimed the equations were part of a hidden agenda to manipulate humanity. Governments demanded answers, some even threatening legal action if Alan and his team didn't cooperate. The pressure mounted, but none of them regretted their decision. If anything, it strengthened their resolve to ensure the math remained a force for good. Erebus Group, however, was silent. After the destruction of their Chicago bunker, they seemed to vanish entirely. No new attacks came. No warnings arrived in encrypted emails. It was as though they had dissolved into thin air. At first, this worried Alan. He couldn't shake the feeling that Erebus was simply regrouping, planning something far worse than before. But as weeks turned into months without incident, he allowed himself to hope. Perhaps the disruption program had done more damage than they realized. With Erebus seemingly out of the picture, life began to settle into a fragile kind of normalcy. The fractals disbanded gradually, its members returning to their old lives or starting anew. Ryan stayed behind to help Alan, Lavra, and Sam wrap up loose ends, ensuring the factory was scrubbed clean of any evidence that could be traced back to them. When the last box was packed and the final computer wiped, Ryan shook their hands firmly. "You've done something incredible," he said. "Don't forget why you started this." Then he walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Alan retreated to a quiet cabin in the woods seeking solitude after months of relentless tension. The equations still haunted him, their patterns swirling in his mind whenever he closed his eyes. He knew he would never fully escape the weight of what he had created, yet, surrounded by trees and silence, he found a measure of peace. He spent his days reading, writing, and occasionally consulting with academics who reached out for guidance on using the math responsibly. His work became quieter, gentler, but no less important. Laura returned to academia, teaching physics at a small college where few recognized her name. She loved the simplicity of her new life, the joy of mentoring young minds eager to learn. Her lectures often touched on ethics and science, drawing from her experiences with Alan and the equations. Students listened intently, inspired by her passion and wisdom. Though she rarely spoke about those chaotic months, she carried the lessons with her always, reminding herself and others that knowledge must be wielded carefully. Sam threw herself into her writing, publishing a best-selling expose on Erebus Group and the events that followed. Her book became required reading for anyone interested in surveillance, technology, and the balance of power. Through her words, she gave voice to those who had suffered under oppressive systems, shining a light on injustices many had ignored. Fame brought challenges, but Sam faced them head-on, determined to use her platform for change. Though their paths diverged, the bond between Alan, Lavra, and Sam remained unbroken. They kept in touch through occasional phone calls and letters, sharing updates about their lives and reflecting on all they had been through. None of them forgot the sacrifices made along the way, the lives lost, the risks taken, the trust broken and rebuilt. Those memories shaped them, shaping the choices they made moving forward. One evening, as autumn leaves fell softly around his cabin, Alan sat by the fire with a notebook in hand. He flipped through its pages, tracing the equations that had changed. Everything? For so long, he had chased answers, believing math held the key to understanding the universe. Now he realized the truth. Some questions couldn't be solved with numbers alone. Free will, morality, the human spirit, these were mysteries beyond any equation. As the flames crackled and danced, Alan closed the notebook and set it aside. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the promise of tomorrow. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew they would face them together, not just Alan, Lavra, and Sam, but everyone who had been touched by the unusual math. Together, they had proven that even in a world driven by predictions and probabilities, unpredictability still held power. And sometimes, that was enough to change the course of history.